Hey guys, how's it going and welcome back. So where does the tone actually come from in an acoustic guitar? Well, a lot of people, believe it or not, believe in tone wood, which, well, I heard Martin for themselves that they actually said that the wood really makes very little impact at all on the sound of the guitar, and they are quite correct. Though there are many companies who would lead you to believe that tone wood does exist, it's a real thing, and when you have a high grade wood of this or that, it makes a difference in the tone. Well, it certainly makes a difference in the price tag, that's for sure, because the more exotic the wood type, the harder it is and the more costly on materials and labor to finish that product to the type of finish that they get in the end. So yeah, there's something to be said about expensive woods. So if you have a guitar that's, say, like an electric guitar, for example, if it's made out of all rosewood or purple heart, which is part of the rosewood family, could be made out of bloodwood, could be made out of green heart, which is actually a wood used in marine grade applications for building boats. I mean, there's so many wood types out there. It's crazy. It's just like fretboards, right? You know, they use ebony, or they use roadwood or payfaro, and of course richlight, which isn't even a wood anyways. That's another material being used for fretboards. And yet, well, some people think that the fretboard wood has something to do with tone. Well, how can it if richlight isn't even wood? Think about it. So what Martin Guitars said is when it comes to the tone or the sound of the guitar, and why it sounds the way it does, it's got nothing to do with the back and sides. They said it could be solid wood, could be layered wood, could be laminated wood. Now there is a difference between layered and laminated. Now with laminated wood, of course, otherwise known as plywood, your top grain you'll always see going down. And then the middle section is coming this way. And then the bottom section will go, of course, the same direction as the top. So it would appear as if it's solid wood, but it really isn't. It's actually laminated, which also makes a very strong top, very durable, not very subject to humidity, unlike solid wood, which is very subjective to humidity. Very critical that you keep a certain humidity range for your guitars. Otherwise, if they're too dry, well, the cracks split apart, dry up. If it's too wet, it's a very soupy sounding guitar and very easy to warp too, so gross. But there is something to be said about the tops though being solid versus laminated or even a layered top. Layered tops are extremely rigid but do allow for resonation to take place. A laminated top really doesn't move, so you get a very tinny sounding guitar. One that's lacking bass too, especially in a larger body guitar. You would think, wow, it's got a large body, it should be bassy, right? No, not necessarily. With a solid top, then yeah, depending on how thick that top is, depends on what your bass response is going to be. But that also goes against with what's next. What else is part of our tone? Okay, how about the body dimensions? How thick it is here, how thick it is here. You know, whether or not you've got an archback or a flat back. Well, I don't really think that makes a whole bit of difference because, well, it really doesn't. But it is part of dimensions nonetheless, so it does have some play in there, but just not a whole heck of a lot. What's very important though is the physical size of the body, okay? That's going to make a difference. And if it's a solid top versus a laminated or layered top, that's going to make a difference too. But wait a minute, there's got to be more. Of course there is. Gauge of strings. You know, a thicker gauge will give you more bass. And of course they do tend to be a little bit less trebly and mid-range as well with thicker strings. But, let's think. Common string gauge is 1254. Okay, that would be considered a light gauge string. And then of course anything below that gets into the territory of, you know, really light or ultralight kind of thing. Well, I use 1253s. That's what came with my Taylor and their Elixir Nano Web Phosphorus Bronze. Now, of course, the type of material your strings are made out of, along with the gauge of them, does make a big difference in the sound of your guitar. In fact, it makes up for a huge part of the sound of your guitar. Because going from a set of, say, elixirs on this guitar to a set of D'Addario strings, whether they're coated or not, makes no difference, or slinkies, or whatever brand of strings, you know, coated or non-coated, phosphorus bronze, or 80-20 mix, or whatever the mix is, that makes a difference on how your guitar is going to sound, right? Also, how long those strings are going to last depends on the material they're made out of, too. Now, coated strings, I change my strings once a year on my Taylor, no matter how much or how little I play it. I get a year, no matter what, out of my Taylor guitar with a set of strings. And I'm using the same strings that it came shipped with from the factory. Now, of course, our 214 CE here is called a cutaway, CE for cutaway. And of course, it's also electric because it has a pickup in it. Now, with that, you know, a pickup is going to sound different because it's not getting the influence from the body, right? It's getting whatever's coming off here, but it's not really getting any influence from the body at all because it's not what would be considered to be like a microphonic pickup in that sense. You know, so it's not like a microphone kind of pickup. Those kind of pickups are very subject to feedback very easily, where this, not so easy, right? Plus I can adjust it as well for bass, mids, and trebles. So where does the whole bass, mid, and treble come from? Well, your E and A, those would be your bass strings, D and G is your mid, and B and E is your treble, right? And how well that sounds does depend on how well the top can resonate, okay? But it also has a lot to do with the body size, of course, too. Right, so really does it matter what woods a guitar is really made out of? No, because there's no tone in the wood. Just like people say the tone's in your fingers. Well, how is that even possible? It can't be. There's no tone in these fingers. They don't make any sound. All they're responsible for is holding a string down onto a fret so that the fret in front can be open to let the string run out. So therefore there's no tone in your fingers. So I still don't get why people think that the tone is in your hands, it's in your fingers. There's no tone in your fingers. What you can do as far as being able to bend strings, that's called an ability or a skill. Fretting your notes properly, that's an ability, right? That's a skill, right? How fast and smooth you can switch between them. How well you strum the chords as per proper. So a D would normally be 3, but you can add in the D above to round it off because you have that ability to go to that open D. When you have a C chord, you're using 5 strings only. When you're doing a G, 6. When you do an E, you have the option of the open D, or you can just hit the 5. Some chords have benefits to them where you can change things, right? But let me think. Do the tuners make a difference? No, they just matter as far as being able to tune the guitar and helping it to stay in tune by not moving on you. Okay, so even a lot of the cheaper tuners out there, well, they can work, but they do tend to come loose very easily. They don't hold a lot of tension or slack that well. They tend to back off. Where a more quality tuner, even in the cheaper scale, like what comes with this Taylor and many guitars, they're actually really good. Now, how precision you get in tuning, well, that depends on how much patience you have with lower turning ratio tuners. I prefer a high ratio tuner like a 21:1 or a 35:1 or higher. And they actually have a lot of other tuners out there that go extremely high in tuning ratios and mixed ratios as well. Why, I don't know. I've seen a Martin with mixed ratio tuners and I'm like, why would Martin do that? But hey, they did. It's their thing, right? So the tone, it's all in how well you can chord a note and proper. See, that's the thing. If you push too hard on a string, you actually push it out of pitch because there is a space. Because if you just hold down the note till it just rings out properly, your flush isn't actually touching the string to the fretboard and your finger's not touching the fretboard itself. And even if it was, it wouldn't matter because nothing goes on there anyways, because behind there is just this. It's what's in front of it. Because we're holding a string down to the fret wire. What's important is that we don't press too hard or we raise the pitch and we're playing out of tune. So, therefore, is tone in your fingers? Absolutely not. Okay? Is it in the type of wood that's being used? Well, not on the back and sides, okay? But on the top it does make a difference, even in a solid top. Spruce is a very flexible wood, but the spruce can also be very tight grained or very loose grained too, which a looser grained piece of spruce will give more flexibility, same as cedar wood, you know. And cedar has a way in which it vibrates. And we've heard of cedar tops on guitars. We've heard of even all mahogany tops on guitars too, right? And how that grain of wood is structured depends on how much it can actually resonate or move, right? So it's going to help in the creation. Yes, it definitely has a big role there. But the biggest part of the role in itself is actually the strings that you're using for the gauge and type and your body dimensions. That's a huge impact there. So if you listen to my Taylor here for a minute. And it is very well balanced for its sound. So now, if we were to just go over to another guitar here for a moment. So I have another guitar that is what they call a concert size. Okay? And it's a dreadnought style. Okay, it's also a Fender, which makes no difference. Right? Now, it's got mahogany back and sides. You know, I've got koa back and sides and a spruce top on the Taylor. Well, this is mahogany back and sides, mahogany neck. And of course we have a spruce top. Solid top too. So, same thing. Okay, now remember we talked about a flat back versus an arch. Now there is one effect that does take place between them. This is going to be a lot tighter, so it doesn't really do anything as far as volume output goes, and it doesn't do anything as far as bass control goes. But to get more bass without going to a much bigger body, right, one of the things that can be done is called an archback. And that's something that's very common to find in your 100 and 200 series Taylor acoustics. And there are other acoustics out there doing the same thing. So this has got what's called an archback. And it's just a small arch. It's very minimal, but it's enough that it helps create a little bit bigger body, which is why we get more bass, right? And we get, you know, along with the dimensions of the body too, is also volume output. But that again is very subjective because it's the size of the sound hole that's going to allow X amount of air to come out along with that sound. So if we look at the sound hole on that one and we measured it up against this one, they would be pretty close to each other, right? Whereas I have a smaller sound hole, technically, on my Yamaha thin line acoustic guitar, but it's oval shaped. If it was squashed in round, it would be almost the same size as this, right? So if we want to take a look at the Yamaha for a moment, just so that you get a real good grasp on body size, because, you know, I mean, the Taylor and the Fender aren't really that close to each other for body size, but they both have larger bodies, right? This is a thin line Yamaha Apx 600. So if we, and there, of course, it's a flat back. I can't remember the back and sides, but it is a spruce top nonetheless. Okay. what you notice here is it's a little more thinner sounding, it's not as loud, not quite as much bass. It's still very well balanced in its tone. And these aren't elixir strings. So, there is a difference in body size. That does have a lot to do with your tone, as well as your volume, okay? As well as your string gauge and string type and the material it's made out of. These are all the main key factors. Now, anything further to that that could affect the actual tone would be something like the material in the saddle as well as the nut. Okay, going from plastic to tusk to actual cattle bone, moose bone. If we were allowed to still use real ivory, which we can if we take an old piano that's scrap and take all the ivory keys off that are real ivory, we could make nuts and saddles out of that stuff, because that at least we can still do. But to go harvest ivory, no, that's actually illegal nowadays. So, but the nut material and the saddle material will change the tonal characteristics a little bit as well. And I do mean it's a little bit, right? So, and of course we all know scale length has those effects too at the same time. Scale length does make a difference in how a guitar can sound, but not so much as it does the body dimensions, the strings and gauge you use. These are the major components, as well as the size of that sound hole. And if you had a second sound hole, like that's becoming a new thing nowadays, right? That second sound hole, so you can actually hear yourself play for a change, because generally the sound goes out toward the audience, and we don't hear it as loud as what it actually is. I had that experience when I had my Takamine GD30 a long time ago. I was playing at the Powassan Jammers, and I was actually drowning out the guy in front of me that was playing mandolin, and it was such a loud instrument that he had a hard time hearing others too. But we were facing each other. What do you do, right? But, you know, I hear a different sound here at this angle than what you hear coming into the camera's microphone, right? So if I lean over more, I can hear a slightly different sound. So, but yeah, the actual material is pretty negligible on what the guitar is actually made out of, other than, yeah, the top does make a difference, how thick or thin that solid wood is. What kind of solid wood does create a difference in the balance, right? And even some solid woods, like your harder solid woods too, even if they're thinner, they're not going to move around very easily, right? Because they're too tight a grained and too stiff of a wood. So sometimes you don't even need to worry about the whole laminated thing. It's the kind of wood that's on the top, right? If it can't resonate properly, well, you can't do a whole lot about it, right? So anyways, but that's where the tone actually comes from in an acoustic guitar. So in case you were wondering, and hopefully this answers it too, there is no real such thing as tone wood. Because even Martin themselves, who've been in business for over 200 years making guitars, they've even said too, there's such a very minuscule percentage of the actual woods being used, it's ridiculous. You know, the major key components here are what we've already talked about. That's what makes up the sound and tone that you hear out of each guitar. Now, Taylor is also the only company in the world that we are aware of, at least, that can 99% clone every single guitar, or at least pretty close to 99%. Nobody else can even come close, so that makes every single other brand out there, and even of the same model in same said brand, very unique from each other, where every 214 CE is going to sound very identical. You won't be able to really tell the difference. In fact, my first 214 I played on was right-handed at Long and McQuaid. You know, and that's what got me a little hooked into this, because I couldn't afford the all-covo one that I want, which is almost twice the money. You know, it's actually $1,000 more than this one. And eventually I'll get it, and that'll be the last acoustic I'll ever have to buy, or want to buy either. You know, but I mean, this has got an ebony fretboard, and you know, I've got a walnut fretboard. I believe, yeah, that one's got the walnut fretboard, walnut bridge. Makes no difference, right? Body size, body dimensions, cutaway versus dreadnought. There is a difference by having that small amount of wood knot there. It makes a difference in the overall tone of the guitar. You know, some people say no, but, well, if you're tone deaf, I guess you'll never know. So, there you go. But anyway, that concludes this video, so thanks so much for hanging out, and hopefully this really helped you understand where the tone really does come from in an acoustic guitar. And stay tuned, because we're going to do the same type of video, but we're going to talk about electric guitars, okay? Not just the solid bodies, but also the semi-hollow and the hollow bodies as well with electric guitars, because they're definitely a different beast than, of course, these. So, anyway, see ya!